Okay, finally, we've made it. For those of you who've been watching some of my stuff, you might have been expecting that this shir is going to be about coffee, and I'm here to tell you that it is. There's nothing in here, so it's empty completely. I don't drink coffee personally. In randomly, I'll have it, and it's probably not even considered coffee. The amount of sugar and creamer that I put in to actually enjoy it, it's probably not even considered coffee. I'm not such a coffee guy. With that said, I want to share with you a tremendous lesson that we can learn from coffee. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the sponsor for this video, for this shir, my brother-in-law and sister, Rena and Aaron Leib Wheelcatch. Thank you so much for the sponsorship. Let's jump right in. As I said, I'm not really such a coffee drinker. Yes, I've been through the classic yeshivas, and you have guys rolling in and out of coffee at all hours of the day. I was never that guy. It just wasn't me. I'm happy with a cup of water, a glazel, a tazel, a cup of tea or something like that. I didn't need coffee. A few years ago, and what started me on this coffee exploration and journey, a few years ago, I had a gematria revelation. I had this thought, an idea that I'm going to share with you as a way to introduce this topic of coffee. So this time of year that we're in, Elul, we know ani ledodi v'dodi li. Those words sum up this year, this time of year, right? And ani ledodi v'dodi li, look up the Kitzur, look up the Mishnah, look up myriad of sources. It's an acronym for Elul, right? And the last four letters of ani ledodi v'dodi li is yud, 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 which is 10 times 4, which is 40, representing the 40 days of this reyes, of this dodi, of this love between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of this Teshuvah time period, of this connection and Devekas and Ava. And I was thinking about it. It's interesting. Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li is gematria, has the numerical value exactly of 185, which in Hebrew, the word for coffee is kafeh, kuf pei hey, is exactly 185. And I'm thinking, this is amazing. After all, the Rambam says famously, the Rambam in Hilchos Teshuvah, the Rambam says, Afal Pisha Tekiya Shofar. He talks about the idea of shofar, and he says it's a remez of Uru Yeshenim Mishinaschem. It's to awaken, oh, sleepy ones, from your slumber. You always have to add in the letter O. There's a couple of places. The translation for Shema Yisrael, if you look, it's often Hear, O Israel. And this is another one. Awaken, O sleepy ones. Maybe that could be a conversation for another time of why that is. But the Rambam says this is the time period, right? The shofar, which is what we blast every single day during this time period. It's a time of awakening from our slumber. Now, my friends, I ask you, what is the quintessential drink in the Welt, in the world, that represents awakening, that represents coming alive, waking up? It's coffee. So how interesting that the gematria of ani l'dodi v'dodi li is exactly the same as kafeh 185. Very nice, cute. I would share this idea with my rebbeim and with friends and family, and the best reaction, people like it, it's nice, but at best it's nice, it's cute. One of my pet peeves is if I tell a vart to somebody, and if they respond, it's cute, I know I didn't do a good job. I know I didn't knock it out. I know I didn't knock it out of the park. I know I could have done it better. If the reaction that you get is, oh, cute idea, something missing. Something is missing. Something that something genuine is missing. So this year I decided to go just all the way in. No going through the shallow end, just to go straight to the deep end and dive in head first. Of course, there was a sign that says, there was no sign that said no diving head first. So, I made sure to listen to those rules. And I just dove head in. And what I'm going to show you in the next few minutes and reveal to you is that this connection between coffee and Avodas Hashem and Yiddishkeit is so much deeper than perhaps we may have thought. And I want to just preface that I have a written version of this, which has additional sources and marmakomos and footnotes as well. Please reach out to me, RABBISTRUMO @gmail.com. It's perfect reading if you want for the high holidays. or just, whenever, please reach out to me, rabbistrumo@gmail.com. I'd be happy to send you a full copy of the write-up. So here we go. Let's jump right in. So first, let's talk a little bit about the history and the origins of coffee. According to the National Coffee Association, and I quote, "No one knows exactly how or when coffee was discovered, though there are many legends about its origin." And you can look online, there are a plethora of legends. The most classic and well-known legend channels and traces all the way back to around the 6th century by a guy by the name of Kaldi the goat herder. And this guy Kaldi, found that his cows were eating, or goats were eating from these red berries. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, coffee actually, right? What does it look like? Coffee is from a red berry. It looks like a cherry. They're like cherries. And inside they have these seeds. And those seeds are what we ultimately, grind down, and that's what makes our coffee. But they're really berries. So much so that the bracha on that would be ha'etz. So it's just interesting. So the first legend of the discovery of coffee was by Kaldi the goat herder. This is in Ethiopia. And he noticed that his goats were eating from this red berry stuff, and they started dancing around, and they couldn't sleep that night. And Kaldi said, "Interesting," and he took it to the local abbot. He took those berries to the local abbot in the local monastery, and the abbot, he tried some. He made a drink out of it, and he couldn't fall asleep either that night. And one thing led to the next, and he shared it with his people, and his people shared it with others, and the magic berries ultimately spread. That's the legend. Is it true? Is it not? Who knows? There's various other legends. One legend, which is fascinating, is that the person who first discovered coffee was none other than somebody we are all familiar with, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. Now, it's interesting. There was a podcast called The Complete History of Coffee, and in episode 20, Coffee History Recap Part 2, which was recorded on Monday, August 21st, 2023. The host, if you look, you start at minute 8:30, and in the episode he says like this: the first person to discover coffee was the great King Solomon. He went to a town that was suffering from some sort of ailment, and through the help of Archangel Gabriel, he was able to cure them with coffee, or kawa, as it was known by the Arabs. The story was apparently lost to history, and so it wouldn't be until the 15th century that coffee would be discovered again. If you look, there's a website, procaffeination.com. It records this story as well, about some place that had a plague, and King Solomon gave them this coffee, and they were healed. There's another website called cityweekly.net, and it records this story as well. It's just interesting. There is a guy who's called the Coffee Historian, and I was interested about this finding that King Solomon. I'm like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Like he's one of our kings. Like I'm Jewish, and that's like King Solomon from Shlomo HaMelech himself. Like, he discovered coffee. Could it be? Again, this is a legend, but it was just interesting. So I went to the Coffee Historian. I'm like, this guy probably knows about coffee, and I went to the contact page on his website, and I sent him an email, basically saying that I'm exploring the history of coffee, and I heard a podcast where it mentions King Solomon. And a few days, anyways, I was asking him what his thoughts were. He actually responded to me a few days later. The coffee historian himself, his name is Jonathan, and he said he basically said he didn't recognize the story, he didn't have knowledge of that, and he gave me a book. He said, "I recommend Robert Liberal's Jews Welcome Coffee as the best book on the ways that early modern European Jews incorporated coffee drinking into their daily lives." Okay, interesting. That's just kind of what happened. So there's this alleged legend that Shlomo HaMelech discovered coffee. Now put that on back simmer for a few minutes, just on a low simmer, like you're cooking white rice. Okay, fine. There is a fascinating website called the Svarim blog. The Svarim blog is by Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brat, and he has a whole piece. This was actually written, I think, in like 2007 or 2008, all about a strange drug, which was well known, a medieval drug called balador. Maybe you've heard it, maybe not. There's this phrase called chazor v'yal tetzarech lebalador. Repeat, do chazara basically, and you don't need to come on to balador. And this phrase is actually already discussed perhaps not by Chazal themselves, but for sure people, maybe like the Rishonim and different things like that. You could check out that blog article. But there is this medieval drug called Balador, which was known for strengthening memory. Now, there's a big question which he discusses in this blog. What exactly is Balador? There's a bunch of different opinions. There is one opinion that it's none other than coffee. The opinion is written by the Otzar Chaim. The Otzar Chaim was written by Rabbi Yaakov Zahalon, who lived in the 1600s. This was written like this. He says, Cholsis hu min zera echad hamischamim haguf. There's this concept of, there's this product, there's this species, something called cholsis. Cholsis is discussed in the Talmud. Cholsis is discussed in the Rambam. What is it? Cholsis, according to the Otzar HaChaim, according to Rabbi Zahalon, Cholsis is none other. He says, Bari Yishmelim koren lo kavi, kuf aleph vav yud. It's coffee. And by the way, part of the difficulty of the research of coffee is that it's spelled in so many different variations. So far, I found at least 12 or 13 different ways of spelling coffee in Hebrew letters, right? Kuf pei he, kuf aleph vav he, kuf aleph vav yud, kuf aleph ayin pei yud ayin. I mean, there's like just 12 ways. So, and different svarim, depending on when they were in, refer to it in different ways. But we see there's this an opinion that Balador, which was good for your memory, was identified by this great sage as none other than coffee. Okay. Now, let's get even more interesting, right? Who discovered Balador? So this is also subject to debate. There is one opinion that the person to discover Balador was none other than Shlomo HaMelech. If you look, there's a man by the name of Emmanuel Lo. Emmanuel Lo wrote a book called Die Flora der Juden, the Flora of the Jews. And on page 203, and I actually found this on the Goethe Universität Frankfurt, some university. The whole thing is written in German. I was able to locate this and used Google Lens to be able to figure out what it was saying. And I read to you in the English translation where it says, this Arab said from Cordova, provided King Solomon with an Anarcadia recipe of Merkachas Balador. So this is that source from Emmanuel Lo showing that the person who first discovered or used coffee was King Shlomo himself. Now, again, these are a lot of theories, but putting these two theories together, that the discovery of that, first of all, that Balador is coffee, and that Balador was perhaps discovered by Shlomo Melech, if you put those together, then you'd have to understand that King Shlomo discovered coffee, which would actually perhaps be a theory, an interesting theory, as basis to these several sources which I quoted, who all reference this story about King Shlomo using coffee. Whether it's true or not, who knows if we'll ever know, but it is an interesting theory. Now, let's jump, a couple hundred more, several hundred more years. Coffee was rediscovered again and around the 15th century. This is more the modern history of coffee. And it was being cultivated in East Africa, and then it was traded across the Arab Peninsula. And within a century, coffee houses started opening up all across the Arab world. In 1570, there were more than 600 of these coffee houses in Constantinople alone. And they continued to spread north and west from the Ottoman Empire. And coffee continued to expand, and it entered ultimately into the Islamic world, where what was fascinating, and this happened in Europe as well. Again, in Europe, it started more even later on in the 1600s. And in fact, in London, it's brought down that in 1650, the first establishment in England, a first coffee establishment, was opened up by a man by the name of Jacob the Jew, a Jewish person. It was interesting. It's from the historical perspective, people throughout the day, whether it was morning, afternoon, the evening, many people just resorted to alcohol. people were drunk all the time. People were in taverns, and that was like the drink. You couldn't really drink regular water because it was, who knows what was in it, but alcohol, right? It was more pure, it was more clean, and it was safer to actually drink. But people were therefore dizzy and foggy-headed a lot of the day. And as coffee began to spread and be introduced to more and more places, it slowly but surely replaced the alcohol. Again, not that alcohol is not an issue everywhere, but you have the coffee that slowly took over the world, and it kind of enabled this growth period in the world of much more productivity and knowledge and awareness, because what coffee did, just like it did to those goats for Kaldi, the goat herder, right, in the 6th century, what coffee did, it rejuvenated people. It gave them energy. People refer to it as the cup of optimism, as a cup of hope, as, right, people look forward to their coffee in the day. It gives them that caffeine boost. It gives them that attitude and that state of mind where they could think clearly and properly. And there was more productivity that was beginning to happen as a result of coffee. So, that's some of the that's some of the history of coffee. There's a man, his name was Wolfgang Schivelbusch, and he wrote that it spread through the body and achieved chemically and pharmacologically what rationalism and the Protestant ethics sought to fulfill spiritually and ideologically. So coffee started to have this almost spiritual effect on people, where people had this heightened level of alertness and awareness and rejuvenation and energy and passion to live. People would get up and they would drink that coffee, and they would be excited for a new day. And slowly but surely, coffee left not left, but it can spread from Ethiopia and the Arab world and Europe. And eventually it got to the Americas, and now it's, after crude oil, coffee is considered one of the top 3 commodities in the world. Okay? By the way, is coffee actually healthy or not? You have the different debates. Michael Pollan, author of fascinating work called something about your mind. This is your mind on plants, something like that. And he has a whole section on coffee. And he says that like this, he says the current scientific consensus is more than reassuring. It actually suggests that coffee, and tea for that matter, far from being deleterious to our health, actually offers important benefits as long as they are not consumed in excess. And regular coffee consumption is actually associated with decreased risk of several cancers. It's also, for the American diet, coffee and tea are the highest source for antioxidants, which is important for cellular formation. So again, coffee definitely has its positivity to it. The one main downside being it impacts our quality of sleep, which is crucial to have, the level and quality of sleep is crucial to health. So, maybe to have a coffee right before you go to bed is not the smartest of ideas. Okay, that's a little bit of the history of coffee, and let's continue. There's a couple of different shilas that came up as more and more that coffee became popular. Different shilas came up related to coffee. 3 classic questions related to coffee is, number 1, what coffee should it be? What color? Not what color. What bracha should coffee be? So, because the fruits or vegetables in the liquid, sometimes that will make it that, you make that blessing. You make the blessing on the fruit or the vegetable that it was cooked in. Coffee's a little bit different. There's so much water, and the poskim say we make a shahakal. It doesn't take on a ha'etz or a hadama, like you would have thought. It also has halachic ramifications in terms of, if you smell it, do you make a blessing or not? Okay, so that could be a different discussion. Now, another shaila that comes up in terms of coffee is bishul akum. Bishul akum is the principle that we could only eat foods that were cooked by fellow Jews. Bishul akum, the Chazal were trying to say that, hey, we don't want you to intermingle with the non-Jews, with the Goyim, and could lead to intermarriage and things of this sort. So certain types of foods, things that were specifically ola al shulchan belachem, things that were special, things that were royalty, we don't have a goy cook that for us. And the question became, is coffee a problem bishul akum? is there an issue of bishul akum by making coffee? And the poskim say that really there is no issue of bishul akum. There is an opinion that says it is, but we go like the opinions generally that it's not an issue of bishul akum. And in this discussion, one of the leading rabbis in Egypt, later in Sifas, known as Rabbi David ben Zibra, known as the Radvaz, and he has a tshuva, seemingly the first to address coffee in a responsum. And in the Tshuvas Radvaz, he talks about this very, very issue. And he ultimately says there is no issue of bishul akum. Rav Moshe Heinemann on the Sarkei talks about how most of the liquid when you make a coffee is actually water. So it's not really an issue. There's no issue of drinking water, of having water that was made by a non-Jew. There's no issue with that. So, okay. It also is interesting to point out that there was somebody by the name of the Zera Avram, who was the Rabbi Avram ben David. He lived also in the 1600s to the 1700s, and he's seemingly the first to refer to coffee as a Jewish beverage. He calls it a mashka Yisrael. Fascinating. So coffee is called a Jewish beverage. Very nice. What about Havdalah? What's the halacha status of making Havdalah on coffee? And while the chatchila, of course, we use wine, grape juice, coffee, according to most opinions, actually would fall in the category of chamar medina. And therefore, coffee would be able to be used for Havdalah. Okay, very nice. And this leads us to the next phase of this shir. And that is a story from the Baal HaTanya. The Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Baal HaTanya. So he passed away on Chaf Daled Teves in 1812 at the age of 67, and he passed away on a Motzei Shabbos. According to some sources, it was at 10:22 p.m. What's fascinating is that for Havdalah on that Motzei Shabbos, before he passed away, he asked for a cup of coffee to make Havdalah. Now, what was going on? Why did he do that? Was it just random? Did he not have grape juice? Did he not have wine available? Of course he had that available. The Baal HaTanya specifically requested coffee for his last Havdalah. Ravitchi Meyer Morgenstern explains something absolutely amazing. L'chein also Havdalah al kafeh. The Baal HaTanya made Havdalah on coffee. Shehu bisod le'orer inyan kaveh el Hashem, which at its sod, this secret, alpi pnimius, is to be me'orer, is to arouse the avoda of kaveh el Hashem, of hoping and yearning, that tshuka, that ratzon, of striving towards God. The Baal HaTanya, for a reason, his last Havdalah was on a cup of coffee. Coffee represents one of the highest levels that we can attain because coffee is connected to kivoy, is connected to hope. And kivoy is one of the highest levels of Avodas Hashem that's possible to reach. David HaMelech says, Kaveh el Hashem, Chazak v'yamitzlebecha v'kaveh el Hashem. Right? That's the last pasuk of chapter 27 in Tehillim, the very chapter that we recite daily from the Rosh Chodesh Elul all the way through, feels like forever, right? Shmini Atzeres, or Hoshana Rabbah, whenever we stop saying it, right? Chanukah, right? That's when we stop saying it. Purim, right? Kaveh Hashem Chazak v'yamitzlebecha v'kaveh Hashem. It's all about hope. And Ravitchi Meyer Morgenstern connects this idea of kafeh and Kaveh Hashem to the Maimer HaKivoy. The Maimer HaKivoy was an essay on hope that was written by the Ramchal, Rav Luzzatto, right? And I actually subsequently found it inside, and I just want to highlight a few gems from the Maimer HaKivoy, all about this topic of hope. First of all, already, you don't have to look too far, already from the very first word in the Torah, Bereshis, we have an allusion to hope. The Ramchal I tried putting in this phrase in the Otzar Chachma, but I only found it attributed to the Ramchal. So Mustama, he was mechanish this. He says, Ein Rashis Ela Tikva. Rashis is a reference to tikva, hope. So we see in the very first word, Bereshis, a reference to hope. Again, showing the highlight, the quality, the amazing power of hope. Hope is the secret, and the Ramchal continues, hope is the secret of expansion. Hakivoy hu sod ha'ispashtos. He says, Masha ein kin ha'igol hu davar sasum mikol tzad. In contrast to a circle where it's closed on all sides, kaveh is milashon, kivoy is milashon, kav, a line, right? It's like this direct line. That our job, lishuascha kivisi Hashem, like the pasuk tells us, is la'asos kavim. Our job is la'asos kavim, to make lines, not to run around, not where it's hard to get in terms of connection to Hashem, but no, straight line connection. It represents the kav or ein sof, this direct connection that we have to the Almighty. In the Maimer Akiva, he brings down another point that hamikave tamid b'simcha b'litzar. Somebody who has hope is constantly, perpetually in a state of joy, without pain. Somebody who has chronic, constant pain, so he thinks there's no hope. But somebody who has hope, so even if he has to wait a while for the cure, he still lives with joy. And he says such a powerful few words. Nimtza hatikva mechaya oso. We find that hope keeps him alive. And how true is that in the world, in modern psychology? Hope keeps people alive. The Ramchal is saying this. And he says even further, again, closer connecting to what we're talking about in this time of year in Elul, he says hope is the secret of teshuva. As the Ramchal says, V'zeu sod hatshuva shehu mamish shavel mekoro. Right? He says, Kein hamekava hu mamish boikea bekav tikvaso. Somebody who has hope, he's able to penetrate with the power, with that hope, with the hope that he has. Bekav tikvaso, he's able to penetrate through whatever it is that's blocking in the way to get to the kisya kavod. So hope represents this line, this direct connection. It represents that ability, right? With a circle, right, you bounce right off, but a straight line, it pierces through things. And that's hope. Hope is the kivoy. Hope is this kav. Hope is this line that connects us straight to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nothing in the way. That's tshuva. V'shuva Yisrael ad Hashem. We're doing tshuva all the way up to Hashem. We're getting to Him. We're getting there. There's nothing in our way. We're able to get to that and connect to that. So we already find that from the story of the Balatanya, who made Havdalah on coffee, that it was to be Misora, this idea that coffee is related to kivoy, of yearning and hoping and connecting and connecting to Hashem on this deep, deep level. You know, I want to share with you a couple additional sources on this coffee-kaveh connection. You know, there's a story told about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev, who was once visited by the Chose of Lublin. And the Lubliner brought him some coffee and wanted to pour coffee into the cup first before the milk. Oh, no. The Berditchever said, no, don't do that. First put in the milk and then the coffee. Why? Because milk is chalav. Chalav is gematria 40. Mem, the 40 goes prior to the coffee. That's how you get mikvah, right? You have coffee, which is kaveh, hope. And before that, you have the mem, which is the milk, which is gematria 40. So the Barditchever wanted the Lubliner to put the milk, before the coffee, so that way he would connect to the spirituality of a mikvah. Fascinating, right? Okay, interesting story. Rav Meir of Primishlan, one of the great Hasidic masters, he says also, it brought down that he would see it as a simana milsa latova, as a good simon, that coffee, kaveh, is merames to the pasuk of kaveh el Hashem. The Vishnitzer Rebbe, in the Sefer Meir HaChaim, he says a story that Pa'am la'achar tefillah, One time after davening, somebody asked the Rebbe if he tasted anything. Sorry, the Rebbe asked the person, "Did you taste anything?" And he answered him, "Kishos coffee." He drank coffee before davening. And the Vishnitzer Rebbe said, "Im kain harei zeh maspik." If you drink coffee, that's sufficient. Mata tzarich yosim esher kaveh el Hashem. What more do you need than kaveh el Hashem? The Alexander Rebbe, this is brought in the Sefer Rishimas V'Zichronos, he also brings down that the Rebbe answered somebody of kaveh el Hashem, of connecting it to the coffee industry, and that Hashem will give him help to be matzliach. Again, we keep seeing this idea that kafeh is related to kaveh el Hashem. So I want to share with you 3 definitions of the word kaveh. This is actually fascinating. So there are 3 primary definitions of that root word kaveh. You can look in the etymological dictionary of Rav Hirsch, but it goes in 3 ways. Kaveh is milashon kav, like a line, a plumb line, straight line, like we mentioned with the Ramchal. Kav is milashon mikvah, like we also mentioned. Mikvah means to gather. And kav is milashon tikva, hope, like we've also been discussing. And Rav Yitzchak Ginsburg explains that the common denominator of these 3 things is that they all represent symptom. They all represent this reduction, this contraction, this limitation, this constriction. In what way? Not in the realm of elimination, not in the realm of siluk, of elimination and removal, but they all represent symptom in relation to rikos, of concentration and focus. A line has a starting point and an end, right? A line has 2 points. There's this focus, there's this concentration, here to there, right? A mikvah is a concentration and focus of water into one space. And hope represent the mind and heart concentrating on focusing on a particular thing that they are hoping for. So all 3 definitions have this common denominator of concentration and focus. And oftentimes, to understand something of value, something of importance, something that you want to understand what something means, one of the first places to look is the first time that word appears in the Torah. Where is the first time the word kaveh appears in the Torah? In the root form of kav. Where does it appear? So you don't have to look too far. In chapter 1 of Bereshis, verse 9, the Torah tells us that on the 3rd day of creation, right, Hashem said, Yikavu hamayim. Yikavu, that word, it's right there. That's the first space in the Torah, that's the first place in the Torah that mentions this word kav. And ironically, it actually has a connotation of these 3 definitions. Number 1, it means a gathering of water, right? The whole world was submerged underwater, but now the water would gather in only specific spots. So it represents gathering. It also represents a line. If you look in the Medrash offers 2 additional definitions of what this word Yikavu Hamayim means. Number 1, it means like midah, like a measurement, to make like a line, that Hashem made these boundaries, right? Otherwise, the water would just plummet the entire earth, like it did by the Mabul, right? And number 2, right? So water represents. So the Yikavu Hamayim represents this idea that there was these lines, these perimeters, these boundaries, concentration and focus on particular areas. And the Medrash also says that kaveh, Yikavu is milashon kaveh, like hope, tikva, hope. And that was because right now the waters are going to be isolated, but there would be a time, namely by the Mabul, where the water would have this hope that it would come back together in one full body of water covering the world. So water, the first time the word kaveh appears in the Torah, actually has these 3 definitions of a line, these measurements, this concentration and focus, of gathering like a mikvah, and tikva and hope. Okay, also fascinating. So we're going to end with this, and that is, what exactly is Jewish hope? So if you look on Google, what is hope? You'll get the primary definition of a feeling of expectation and a desire for a certain thing to happen. But what happens once that thing, right? Generally, hope is something that you wish for, that you want. But what happens when you get that thing, right? You get that raise, you get that shidduch, you get that. What happens then? Then you're no longer hoping because you got what you wanted. That's a basic, an important type of hope, but more of a basic superficial type of hope. I want to share with you a mind-boggling malbim. And this malbim is found in Tehillim 27 on the last pasuk, like we mentioned, Kavi el Hashem chazak v'yamitz libecha v'kavi el Hashem. Let me ask you a question. You have hope, right? Kavi el Hashem, you have hope in Hashem. So you got that. Why is David HaMelech saying at the end, Kavi el Hashem again? Well, why? Well, he's hoping, okay, you got what you wish for, right? You got that connection with Hashem. Why are you hoping more? You already got what you wanted. The Malbim says because the hope of Hashem, the hope towards Hashem, the Kavi el Hashem is different than any other type of hope on this world. Ki hatikva l'Hashem nivdelas min hatikva lebasar v'dam b'shnei devarim. It's different. The hope that we have towards Hashem is different than the hope that we have towards others. When it comes to hope towards others, towards other things, so once you get it, you're no longer hoping. But hope in Hashem is different. The hope is not just a means. The hope is also an ends. The hope is the goal. In Yiddishkeit, hope is the goal. Hope, like we mentioned in the Maimer HaKivoy from the Ramchal, hope is one of the loftiest levels to attain in Avodas Hashem, to have that tshuka, to have that desire, to have that ratzon, to have that yearning and that striving, where you want to get more and more closer to Hashem, where you want to build up that growth level within, where you want to get higher and higher. That's something that's a goal in and of itself. It's not just about getting what you're trying to get. We're trying to get to kivoy. We're trying to get to a level of hope, and that's why David HaMelech says, Kavi el Hashem. When once you get it, chazak v'yamitz libecha, and guess what? Kavi el Hashem. The goal is to get back to kivoy. In fact, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who often talks about Geula, uses this pasuk to talk about Geula, and that this pasuk Kavi el Hashem is a reference to Geula, and the same idea emerges that Kavi el Hashem, you have this hope and you have this yearning for the Geula, but then guess what happens? Mir Hashem, the Geula is going to come, and then you know what the avodah is going to be? Kavi el Hashem. To hope again. You know, every day we hope and hope for Mashiach. We hope and yearn and yearn. But guess what? Mashiach's going to come, and our avodah is still going to be to hope and yearn. Because we don't want to shy away from that midah, from that avodah, that avodah gavoa of kivoy. That's the goal itself, is to get to that level. Kavi el Hashem, chazak v'yamitz libecha, the Kavi el Hashem, and then some. To hope is in and of itself the goal. We want to always be hoping and striving and yearning. So we've come a long way, but I think that we've seen something interesting. And that is the gematria ani l'dodi v'dodi li, being the same as kafeh. It's not just cute. It's not just cute. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li is kafeh. It's the same as coffee. Coffee represents Kavi el Hashem, chazak v'yamitz libecha, v'kavi el Hashem. It represents hope in Hashem. It represents this lofty level of connection with Hashem. It represents this connection to the Kav Orient Sof. It represents this kivoy, the gathering of who we are, everything about us. It represents this Kav, where it's not just a circular type of life where we're bouncing things off and you can't get in. It represents a direct line between us and Hashem. Shuva Yisrael ad Hashem. This time period that we're in of Elul and approaching Rosh Hashanah is a time period where we throw the other stuff away and we realize, wow, I am so close to Hashem. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. There's this connection that we have. There's this tremendous ava. There's this tremendous rayas. This tremendous connection. And when people take their cup of coffee, coffee represents that time in their day where they're about to, and it represents that optimism and that hope. It represents that positivity and that rejuvenation and that passion to live and to have ideas and to be creative and explore. So whether you're a coffee drinker or not, coffee, we know, is called a mashke Yisrael, like we saw. Coffee was olah shochem melachim, like we saw. It's a drink of royalty, but perhaps not just because of what it is physically, but what it represents spiritually. It represents kaveh el Hashem. It represents that fact that now is the time to awaken, O sleepy ones, from our slumber. So whether you take your actual cup of coffee or you take what coffee represents, to take what it represents and connect with hope, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to hope for hope, and to keep hoping, and to just yearn, and to have that tshuka, to have that ratzon, to have that drive of, I can constantly grow. Where I am today is not where I'm going to be tomorrow. I'm going to achieve levels of greatness and go higher and higher and higher. Let's embrace what coffee represents. Let's embrace the idea of hope. Let's embrace that last line that we say in chapter 27 of Kaveh el Hashem, Chazak v'yamis libecha, and then have another coffee, V'kaveh el Hashem. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. Please share with a friend or family member that might enjoy. Again, thank you to the sponsor, Rina and Our Lady Real Catch, and thank you to you for watching and enjoying. If you'd like a full write-up of this idea, please email me, rabbistrumo@gmail.com. If you have any questions, comments, or ha'aros on this topic of coffee, any additional sources, I'd love to hear from you. Again, rabbistrumo@gmail.com. Wishing you a ksiva v'chasima tova and a good gebenched oyar.